Many people, as soon as they sit down to talk, lament about their suffering. Why is my life so miserable? But isn't suffering a natural part of everyone's journey? If we were to encapsulate the lives of many people in 3 words, they would likely be cry, suffer, and wither. We are born crying, endure continuous suffering, and persist in a state of dryness, only to repeat it day after day. As a poet once said, life is long, 70 years of health, if lucky, perhaps beyond 80. Yet, the things we relentlessly pursue, what we imagine to be our pride, are in reality pain and worry, only to vanish into nothingness in the blink of an eye. Humans are born to endure suffering. If it's not one kind of hardship, it's another. Suffering seems to permeate our entire lives, yet each person experiences different outcomes because of their differing understandings of it. The frustration at work, financial pressure, the torment of loneliness, the helplessness stemming from birth, aging, sickness, and death, these have always been present, crushing the bodies of countless individuals. So, what should one do during their most difficult times? You might have seen some methods shared when facing suffering, perhaps exploring philosophy in life, or delving into psychology through meaning-centered therapy from the book Man's Search for Meaning, or reading autobiographies of resilient individuals like The Story of My Life by Helen Keller. Today, I'll offer you another suggestion. If you find life filled with too much suffering and don't know how to change it, try reading the biographies of famous people. Roman Roland, the Nobel laureate in literature, escaped the depths of his own misery by writing a classic book, first published in 1903. The book is titled Celebrity Biographies, or The Lives of Illustrious Men in some translations. At a time when the author faced a decline in his career and a failed marriage, it was through the stories of these famous individuals that he found the self-motivation to uplift his spirit, make positive changes, and achieve remarkable success. To inspire even more people, he wrote The Lives of Illustrious Men, also known as 3 Lives of Giants. This isn't a typical chronological biography. Instead, he adopted a unique narrative style, utilizing original materials such as poems, letters, diaries, and self-narratives to deeply portray the turbulent lives of the musical genius Beethoven, the sculptor and painter Michelangelo, and the great Russian writer and thinker Tolstoy. They all faced ironic destinies but transformed their pain into miracles with their unwavering will. Open this book, and you will grasp a simple truth, though not everyone has enough faith to believe it. I am not perfect, but I can still live a full life. I am plunged into misfortune, but I can still live the rest of my life gloriously. When you gain a deeper insight into suffering, you will no longer expose it easily but quietly tuck it away into the backpack of your life's journey, carrying it with you as you move forward. A sharp sword comes from a finely honed edge, the fragrance of plum blossoms comes from the bitter cold. A keen blade must be sharpened 1,000 times, and a fragrant plum must endure bitter cold day and night. So it is in life. Without experiencing failures and hardships, there will be no true awakening. Suffering is a crucial nutrient in life. It enriches experiences, stimulates regenerative energy, and strengthens your inner self. One day, obstacles that seemed insurmountable will be easily overcome, and then you will truly feel that everything suffering took from you will eventually return in another form. Asterisk suffering in the body. I exchange pain for joy asterisk. The first famous figure in the book is the prodigal composer, Beethoven. Born into a poor family, his father was a crude and alcoholic singer, and his mother a maid. Beethoven himself had an unattractive appearance, lived in poverty throughout his youth, and was often beaten and scolded by his father. He began learning musical instruments at the age of 4 and became a pianist at 13. His mother died when he was 17, leaving him to shoulder the responsibility of raising and educating his 2 younger brothers. The burden of earning a livelihood at such an early age led him into a state of depression, constantly struggling with worries and anxieties. Whenever his spirits flagged, he would pour cold water over his head to calm himself. By the age of 25, he finally became famous and was sought after by the aristocracy. Wherever he performed, audiences packed the venues. A single piece of music he composed could fetch considerable wealth. However, at the peak of his career, he suddenly contracted an incurable deafness. Tormented by tinnitus, his hearing continued to deteriorate, and many parts of his body began to ache. There were times when he struggled to eat, suffered insomnia, and couldn't even concentrate on practicing or composing music. To continue his career, he dared not tell anyone, doing his utmost to conceal his illness. During the day, he pretended to play from experience, while at night, he would refuse all social interaction, enduring the pain alone. In 1801, he fell in love with a girl named Giulietta, but due to his hearing impairment, she rejected him and married a count 2 years later. Facing this double torment of physical and mental anguish, he could only express these feelings in his works. However, no matter how hard he tried, nothing could stop his condition from worsening. By middle age, he had completely lost his hearing and could only communicate with others through writing. When performing an opera, he was once driven off stage because he could not hear any sound. His influence also severely declined. No one paid attention to his works. Some nobles even deliberately made things difficult, demanding free compositions. Plagued by financial difficulties, his relatives and friends gradually passed away or left him. In his final years, Beethoven was tormented by illness and had to beg for food. Such a talented musician falling into such an abyss makes us realize that fate is always accompanied by the word uncertainty. Amidst the trials of destiny, no one can predict when disaster will strike, and no one can escape physical pain. Beethoven's case deeply saddens me, as a close friend of mine, the same age, faced a similar situation. After graduating from university and preparing to study abroad in Germany, my friend unexpectedly contracted a strange illness that even doctors worldwide cannot accurately diagnose to this day. It robbed my friend of the ability to walk normally. At the most beautiful age of life, physical pain struck like a violent storm, sweeping away personal dreams and leaving a heavy economic burden. In the icy grip of pain, fate feels like a knife cutting through flesh and bone. The sensations of agony and helplessness make us see only an eternally hopeless tomorrow. As Roman Roland said in his book, "Life is built on pain, and a whole life is filled with pain." In the face of sudden illnesses and accidents, you and I are merely tiny specks of dust, waiting to vanish without a trace when a storm hits. But do we accept being swept away by the wind, or do we forever drown in this pain, making ourselves smaller, more insecure, and vulnerable to physical complexes? Back then, Beethoven refused to yield, and so did my close friend. I know many others are suffering from illness, but they are not giving up easily. Facing life's greatest challenge, Beethoven lived by a motto to overcome everything: exchange pain for joy. When ill, he had the opportunity to distance himself from the fleeting glamour of the world. He sought solace from pain by immersing himself in nature and began to develop his unique creative style. Eventually, he started composing legendary symphonies, works that moved countless hearts and helped him return to the pinnacle of musical art. Only by experiencing, understanding, and overcoming pain can we fully appreciate what true joy is. Let joy be honored, and let pain also be honored. Joy and pain are two sisters, both are profoundly sacred. They create the world and nurture great souls. Always be a light in the darkness, not merely enduring it. Know that what we do in our greatest trials can become our greatest victory. Suffering from circumstance. I use pain to unleash potential. For many, physical suffering can be endured, but suffering brought on by circumstances often lasts longer and is far more tormenting. The second story in the book is about Michelangelo, one of the greatest painters and sculptors in human history. Yet, throughout his life, Michelangelo suffered from depression and the burdens imposed by his environment. At 25, full of youthful vigor and promising talent, he gained fame and was lauded as Italy's pride. The Pope greatly admired him and summoned him to Rome to build a tomb. Constructing a tomb was an enormous task, demanding considerable time. Merely selecting the stone occupied him for nearly a year. However, the Pope, being temperamental, soon lost interest in the tomb project and expelled Michelangelo from Rome. Shortly thereafter, the Pope had another whim, compelling him to return and sculpt a colossal statue. Michelangelo knew nothing about sculpting, so he had to learn from scratch. This entire process lasted 15 months. He then worked tirelessly, finally completing the statue after numerous failures. Before he could even breathe a sigh of relief, the Pope assigned him another task: painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Again, he knew nothing about fresco painting. He repeatedly pleaded with the Pope to refuse, but his requests were fiercely denied. In despair, he had no choice but to fumble his way through the painting. During this period, he seemed utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally. Years of looking upwards to paint deformed his back and impaired his vision. Observing his own ailing state, he lamented, "This torture has turned me into a bloated monster." Finally, after completing the ceiling fresco, the new pope came to see it. After viewing it, the new pope insisted on assigning him an even more significant task: building St. Peter's Basilica. As a result, Michelangelo once again became a slave to the new pope. Lacking knowledge of architecture, he spent 3 years selecting materials and taking preliminary steps. The pope grew impatient and annulled the contract he had signed with Michelangelo, rendering years of his work useless. Bitterness and despair over wasted time consumed the rest of his life, eroding his talent and health. He no longer had the strength to create works he truly loved and gradually lost his passion for art. In his final years, he lived in isolation, lamenting day and night, his remaining life steeped in regret and despair. Despite achieving success, he could not chart his own life's course but could only drift helplessly in a sea of suffering. As a writer once said, "I cannot control any events. My life is a series of failures without a stopping place, without a destination. Sometimes I am stranded and crash against rocks. Other times, I am like a boat, a wave drifting aimlessly." Often in life, we are like mice trapped in a cage. No matter how we try to escape, we cannot elude the brutal reality. Accepting and confronting life's helplessness is an unavoidable lesson for everyone. Bound by his circumstances, Michelangelo spent most of his life in regret. Yet, he himself did not know that the sculptures he considered mundane still possess enduring and vibrant beauty to this day, such as the statue of David, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and so on. They are truly great masterpieces bequeathed to the world. Circumstances forced him to accomplish tasks he wasn't proficient in, but it was these painful experiences that expanded the boundaries of his art. Roman Roland did not deliberately overlook Michelangelo's weaknesses and inner turmoil simply because he was a genius, and this also applies to Beethoven and later Tolstoy. Being great does not mean always being perfect. Perfection is merely a false ideal. Roman Roland said, "I absolutely do not want to create heroes whom we can only look up to. I detest such heroism. It makes our eyes turn away from the difficulties and weaknesses of the soul. In this world, there is only one kind of heroism: to look at the true nature of the world and still love it. Love life as it truly is, confront the suffering and flaws we face. Honor them." The author conveyed lessons about suffering through Michelangelo's life story to tell us that pain is a gift for everyone. No matter how life treats us, we can still love life. Experiencing pain is the way to unleash your infinite potential. Asterisk suffering in the soul, I preserve pain for love. The final great figure in the book is the profound thinker and magnificent Russian writer Tolstoy. Born into an aristocratic family, he enjoyed a life of comfort and privilege from childhood, free from worries about food and clothing, and received an excellent education. With his extraordinary literary talent, he gained a prominent position in literary circles at a young age. A revered senior figure, Turgenev, actively befriended him, inviting him to literary and artistic gatherings and treating him with great respect. By worldly standards, Tolstoy was a winner in life, achieving success that many envied. Yet, instead of enjoying and further developing this path to glory, he strenuously rejected indulgence, desiring only to benefit the poor. He entrusted a portion of his forests to peasants, regularly visited farms to understand their circumstances, and sought every way to help poor households. He repeatedly opened schools for peasant children, personally finding teachers and designing curricula, even falling ill from his excessive dedication to these endeavors. As an aristocrat, he never considered himself superior to others. Instead, he had his wife and children live in an old, sparsely furnished house. He also discussed with his students his plan to distribute all his land to the peasants and donate the royalties from all his works to charities. However, no one around him seemed to understand his unconditional kindness. Turgenev wrote to him, urging him not to waste his talent and to return to literature as soon as possible. His wife blamed him for being irrational and irresponsible, constantly immersed in senseless frenzies, and threatened to force him to abandon his charitable work. Even the peasants whom he cared for so deeply complained that the schools he built only delayed their children from working on the family farms. His kindness was mocked and trampled upon. He became an outcast, alienated by everyone. Loneliness and sorrow accompanied him through the years. At the age of 82, feeling utterly disheartened and disappointed, he chose to leave his home and wander. A few months later, he fell ill by the roadside and died, with no friends, family, or relatives remembering him. It is said he entered the world naked, crying aloud, and ultimately left it alone in silent tears. His life truly exemplified the saying, "Man is destined to be alone, destined to live among countless others, but unable to truly connect at the deepest level." On life's journey, we have likely experienced loneliness many times, feeling misunderstood or facing cold indifference and lack of support. But being misunderstood and unacknowledged is a normal part of life. Different experiences, perspectives, and stances create high walls that are difficult to overcome between people. Ultimately, we can only regard everyone around us, including loved ones and those closest to us, as fellow travelers on a specific stretch of road. They will arrive, and then, by destiny, they will depart from our lives. In the end, we all must bid farewell and walk our own path alone. Tolstoy, unable to find resonance from the outside world, chose to explore his inner self and gradually cultivated profound, radiant, and deeply humanitarian thoughts. His struggle was not to save himself, but to save humanity. He was a true hero who dedicated his life to education and became the most humane of all men. The spiritual suffering he endured ultimately repaid him. Although he passed away, he is remembered through the ages as a great philosopher, thinker, and educator, alongside his role as a man of letters. As the author wrote, "In these divine souls there flows a pure power and a strong compassion like a surging storm. You don't even need to explore it through their works, words, and actions. You can see their greatness, their completeness, their happiness, even amidst hardships and adversity. Everything suffering takes from you will eventually return in another form." Nature always has a law of compensation. You might notice that those with physical impairments often possess another strong point that shines brightly. For example, a blind person often has extraordinarily sharp hearing, far surpassing that of ordinary people. Suffering also has a similar law of compensation. As a certain philosopher once said, "Every suffering in life can be compensated. Everything suffering takes from you will eventually return in another form." Born human, no one willingly endures hardship. We prefer feelings of joy and comfort, which is why we always try to avoid and fear suffering. But pain never appears without reason. It is a form of cultivation, an unavoidable lesson, and a rapid path to help us grow. The existence of suffering is not to hurt you, to defeat you, but to awaken you, to recreate you. The best way to alleviate sorrow is to change our perspective. Amidst ups and downs, you still have faith. In difficulties and hardships, you maintain your initial enthusiasm and believe that you will surely succeed. In loneliness, you can still give love to humanity. You can endure, embrace pain, overcome challenges, and write a glorious chapter of your own, like a phoenix reborn from the ashes. As the author's famous quote, which I will repeat in these final messages, states, "In this world, there is only one kind of hero. Those who, even when they clearly see the true nature of life, thoroughly understand its sufferings and bitterness, can still wholeheartedly love life, no matter how difficult it may be. Those who bravely confront fate, remain optimistic, and smile in the face of suffering can always live more strongly each day." May all of us be heroes of our own lives.